Hello, can y'all hear me? Can you hear me? Ooh, that was bad. Can y'all hear me now? How's everybody doing this morning? How's everybody doing this morning? Man, where do I start? This year, for this church, the theme is keeping God first. And for us to keep God first, I had to ask myself a few questions in terms of what do we want this church to be in terms of moving forward, and just seeing the congregation that we have, how we've had a lot of people move, and then we have a lot of new people coming in, and how it's a younger congregation. I saw that keeping God first was a really big step for us moving forward as a church and the foundation. And I remember when I preached last semester, my title was Shake the Room. Everybody say shake the room to your neighbor. Say shake the room to your neighbor. And God was like, that's good, Charles, but you're still a little bit too shallow for me. Like, you're not deep enough for me. You know what I mean? He says you're not, like, you're still, he told me that you're still doing half and half. You're still hot and you're still cold for me. And I don't appreciate that at all. And, you know, this is why it's good to have good women in your life. I remember I was talking to Asumchi, I was talking to Marion, and, you know, they like to challenge me and call me out on stuff that I do. And this is why, guys, you shouldn't have women in your life who stroke your egos. Because when you have women in your life that stroke your egos, you're destroying your destiny day by day. And you need to have real women in your life who can tell you the truth. Because if you don't have the truth in your life, I feel sorry for you, honestly. But as I was, you know, thinking and praying heavily, the main thing that came to my mind is that it's the relationship for me. And that's the main thing that God really cares about. He doesn't care about your past. He only cares about your present and your future. And I want us to please, can we please turn to Matthew chapter 7, verse 21 to 23 first. And I read, "Not everyone who calls out to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Only those who actually do the will of my Father in heaven will enter." Next verse. "On judgment day, many will say to me, Lord, 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 we prophesied in your name, we cast out demons in your name, and performed many miracles in your name. But I will reply, I never knew you. Get away from me, you who break God's law." And when I was reading that, to me, God was telling me that, Charles, yes, you serve in church. Yes, you put a lot of your money in church, but I don't care about any of that stuff. You can come to church on Saturday and leave at 9 o'clock at night, but what does that really do for me? Because I don't know you. And I think for a lot of us, we do a lot of things for God, but do we actually know God for ourselves? Do we actually know God for ourselves? And the first thing that came to mind was when I asked myself, do I know God for myself, is, do I even read my word enough to know God for myself? And I ask myself times like, how come I can't hear God? I can't hear him speak. I will ask him questions, and I could never find those answers to my questions. And one of the first convictions that I had was that I actually have to study the Bible for myself. And as I started studying the Bible for myself, I started to see that a lot of the questions that I would ask God for were already written down in the Bible. A lot of the stuff that I was looking for was already written down in those pages. And I came to the conclusion that I had to actually put God first in my life. And to do that, I actually had to take the time to actually get to know him. So there were a few phases that I had to go through. And the first stage is intimacy. Intimacy. And intimacy is, I think for most people here, it's the need to know, to get to know. So for me to get intimate with God first, and this is the first step for a lot of people, I had to ask for forgiveness. I had to repent. And for a lot of people, asking for forgiveness is such a really, really, really hard thing for them to do. Because for a lot of us, you make mistakes and you get so down and then you want to run away from God. But you always have to remember that God loves you for who you are. And I want you to all, can we all please turn our Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 5. And it says, love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. And for us, we have to understand, the reason why it's so hard for us to forgive ourselves is because we don't truly love ourselves. We don't truly love ourselves, and because we don't truly love ourselves, we beat ourselves up over and over and over and over and over and over again. And when you read that, when it talks about love in 1 Corinthians, we have to understand that God loves us unconditionally. He loves us unconditionally, and he does not care about the stuff that we've done in the past. All he cares about is what are we trying to do today? What are you trying to do right now in this moment? What are you trying to do in the future? Because when you come to the decision that you actually want to start living for God today, a lot of things will start to move forward for you. And after I came to the decision that, okay, I have to forgive myself, the next step was I actually had to learn how to be vulnerable with God. For me personally, I'm really, really good at bottling things in and being like a stone-faced warrior. Like, I'm good. Nothing's wrong with me. I'm straight. But nah, that's cap. That's cap. I had to learn how to be vulnerable. And that's for guys too who are in here. I remember one time we had Bible study. Being vulnerable as a man is very, very frowned upon in the world. They teach us men shouldn't cry, men don't cry. That's a lie, I cry. And we have to break out of that cycle of thinking that men can't cry, that we can't feel bad about our situations that we're going through. If you look in the book of Psalms chapter 13, David was crying out to God about what was going on in his life at the time. And he was crying out to God because he was lonely. He felt like he had nothing going on for himself. He felt like God had left him, basically. And that's a prime example of a man who is considered a man after God's own heart, who was actually so vulnerable with God in those moments. And for men in this church and for those who are watching, we have to come to the decision that we have to be vulnerable with God, because when we're vulnerable to God, there's one thing that he says in his word is that cast all your burdens upon me, for he knows he cares for you. And once you start to open up to God, he'll start to reveal certain things to you. Another problem is some people are vulnerable with God. No, some people are vulnerable, but they're vulnerable to the wrong people. We open up to people who we think can help us, but in the long term, they don't help us at all. All they do is tell us what we want to hear. They sugarcoat things for us. And it talks about in Psalms chapter 55, verse 22. If you can please bring that up for me real fast. It talks about how cast your burden on the Lord and he will sustain you, and he will never permit the righteous to be moved. And in that verse, what it says to me is, when you're all vulnerable to God and you cast all the things that are afflicting you, all those things that are troubling you, all those things that are worrying you, God will sustain you through everything. Because I found out for myself that when I would open up to people, or when some people would open up to me, I would try my best to give them advice or to help them out, but it was falling on deaf ears. They would make the same mistakes and the same mistakes over and over again. And I had to come to the conclusion for myself that when I'm vulnerable with God, he will take care of everything that I'm worried about. All the things that I'm down about, all the things that are troubling me, he will sustain me in every situation that I'm in. And that's what I found upon myself reading as I was reading about the story of Joseph in chapter 37, verse 50, and how in every step of Joseph's downs, God found a way to raise him up. Even when he became a slave, he made him the head slave. Even when he went to prison, he became the head prison guy. And that taught me that every time that the devil tries to bring you down, the God will lift you back up. Anything that the devil tries to destroy you with, God will lift you up with it. And for me, I had to see that God is truly, truly about his word when he says that he will provide for you when you truly, truly need him. The next step for me, and this is a big thing that most people have a hard time realizing, is only God can change hearts. Only God can change hearts. A lot of times, and I'm not going to tell you, a lot of times, people like to get on stage and they tell you that you shouldn't drink, you shouldn't smoke, you shouldn't go to parties, you shouldn't hang out with your certain friends. But I truly believe that God actually convicts people. You don't have to tell them that, actually. And a lot of times you have to realize that people hear you, but their hearts can't hear you. Their hearts can't hear. And that's the biggest thing when we try to, try and save our friends and try to tell them, no, you shouldn't do that. And he's like, well, I'm going to still do what I want to do anyway. So it doesn't really matter what you tell me. And for me, I had to see that only God can change hearts, and that as you're walking in your relationship with God, He will start to see things, He will start to reveal things to you that you have to let go. Not only let go, but also address. Because for some people, they have to let certain things go, but for some people, they have certain things in their lives that they have to address, whether it's a relationship with a friend, whether it's family members. A lot of us have family members who have done really, really awful things to us, who are really bothered, who've done terrible things for us, whether it's through molestation, sexual assault, neglect, not showing true love. And these are issues that God knows that if you don't truly address, you won't be able to ever truly move forward. You always find yourself in a constant loop, going in a circle, day by day. And you have to get to the decision with God when He's showing you these convictions that I'm actually going to listen to you. I'm actually going to do as you tell me in terms of letting these certain things go and actually addressing the people in my life that I have to address. People who have actually hurt me, whether it's through me growing up as a child, through middle school, high school, even college. And for every time, and as people, it's very easy for us to come up with excuses why we can't address certain things in our life or let go of certain things in our life, whether it's, I don't want to be alone. Or I don't know how my father would react if I tell him that one of his brothers did something to me when I was 5. Or, Mom, I didn't really like how you came for me, or how you never supported me while I was playing sports in high school. These are really big things that you have to address. And, sometimes we like to give God our excuses, but if you really come down to think about it, God has already prepared a path for you with all the answers that you'll ever need. And we can see this in the life of Moses, when God approached Moses with the burning bush, and then He told him to approach Pharaoh. And you can see how every time that Moses brought up an excuse, God already had an answer for every situation that he felt that he couldn't overcome by himself. And that's one thing that you have to realize, is that you're not alone when when it's time for you to actually come over the convictions or the people that you have to address. God will always be with you every step of the way. Every step of the way. And the biggest thing for people that they have to realize is that it's okay to say no. It's okay to say no. It's okay to say no to people who feel like they have entitlements to your life. Like, there's certain people who just feel like they're entitled to know stuff about you. They don't. There's certain people who feel like they're entitled to actually be a part of your life and help you, but they don't. Only God is entitled to your life. And that's all you really need to tell them. And the biggest thing that I had to face and understand is walking in the new. So basically, walking in the new is basically, okay, God has come to me. I started my journey in process and trying to get to know God for myself. I spent time opening His Word, reading His Bible for myself, studying, understanding who He is, whether He's my provider, whether He's my healer. And then now I'm in the season of He's starting to reveal things to me. I go out to parties and I'm sober, and now I'm seeing that what once was fun isn't as fun, because now that I'm sober in mind and I'm seeing those who are around me, I'm seeing people who are actually crying for help, not those who are actually having fun. And that was something that actually happened for me. When I started going out, and I started going out sober in mind, and I started seeing people out at night, I started seeing people who, before in my mind, were just having a good time. I was seeing people would walk up to me and I could be like, ooh, this one's going through something really, really bad. I could see a friend who he over here is trying to, pump me up and, get me turned. But I can see, something just happened to him like a few hours ago, and this is why he's acting like this. And once I saw that, I started to understand that listening to God's convictions in my life are really, really, really important, because I started to see that certain things just weren't for me anymore at all. And once I started doing that, I had more convictions started coming my way. And this is the hardest part, because I can't honestly say that I always listened. I didn't always listen. Sometimes I can be very stubborn, or sometimes because I'm naturally smart, I feel like I have all the answers. So sometimes God would tell me something and I would be like, well, yeah, but I'm gonna do it this way. And then we can talk about it later. And I would go do that thing my own way, and I would come back with a bump on my head because, I fell on my head and, I made a mistake. And in those moments, it taught me that I don't know anything. I don't know anything at all. So once I came to that realization that I don't know anything at all, I said a prayer once to God, and this prayer was, God, I want to put my life in your hands. And the reason why I said I wanted to put my life in his hands is because I started to see that I didn't have any answers for all the things that were troubling me or the things that I was going through. And every time I decided to go against his advice, I would see that he was always right at the end. So once I made that prayer, God said, okay, you're going to make that prayer, right? There's certain things I'm going to have to for you to let go. And that one of those big things for me that he made me let go was my relationship. He told me that I have to make you, Charles, you have to be single. Because Charles, you've never been single since you've been in college. You've never been single since you've been in college. You've been in one relationship, and then, a few weeks passed, or maybe a month passed, and you got into a new relationship. And maybe that relationship lasted for a year, and you got into another relationship. And God said, through all those times, when did you ever focus on me? When did you ever sit down to build yourself back up and get to know me for yourself? And at first for me, I didn't want to let go of my last relationship because I liked the relationship. I actually really loved the relationship. But God was like, as much as you love this relationship, you don't love me enough, so that love that you love in that relationship will end up fading away. Because when you actually don't truly love God, you can't truly love anybody else. You can't truly love anybody else. And even if you do, that love, after a few months of, the honeymoon phase, you guys going out, you'll be looking at like, I need somebody new. I need anymore. And that's why actually getting to love God for yourself is a really, really, really big, important thing. Because once I started to see God and I started to love God for myself, and I'm still in this process, it's a really, really early process for me. I'm starting to realize that a lot of the ways that I thought in the past, a lot of those stuff was wrong. And I think this is a big point in terms of why listening to what people say in the world versus what it says in the world, in the Bible, is a really big thing. Because if you listen to the people in the world, you'll start to realize that what they say doesn't actually hold a lot of weight. It doesn't hold a lot of weight at all. And once I started reading stories in the Bible, like I said, I wanted to read the life of Joseph. And just reading the life of Joseph, I started to see that through every situation that God put him through, he never complained. He never complained one time. And that was one thing that really impressed me. I said, if I was in this situation in terms of my brothers betraying me and selling me off as a slave, you couldn't tell me anything, man. I wouldn't listen to God at all. I'd be doing my own thing from then on and then out. If I was made to live in a house and then a woman would come and lie on me saying that I slept with her, but I didn't touch her, and then I get thrown in jail for 20 years, would I still love God the same way? I asked myself and I said, probably not. I said Joseph was a better man than me. And in studying the life of Joseph, I started to realize that it was his relationship with God that kept him through all of his down moments, all his low moments. This was a relationship with God, his understanding, his faithfulness, that God was helping out through every situation is what held Joseph through each low moment and low point in his life. And for me, I started to realize that me walking in the new, and for a lot of us, walking in the new is a very, very, very hard thing, because when you're walking in the new, in your relationship with God, and okay, he's giving you all these convictions, and he's like, okay, God, I'm ready to follow you. But if I give up my friends, who will I talk to? If I give up my relationship, who's going to love me or support me the way she supports me? If I tell my father the truth about what he did to me as a child, what will happen to the rest of my family? Will I have a family? And through that process, God showed me that he already has things in place that will replace all those things that I once lost. And that's the biggest thing for people, is to understand that when you're walking in the new and you're starting to give up things, God has already come up with things that will take over those things that were once in your life, things that will actually sustain you, things that will actually uplift you, things that will actually carry you for the rest of your life. And that's the main thing for me when it comes to it's the relationship for me, because in understanding God for myself, I was able to see that wherever I go in my low moments, he already has things set up and set for me to take over my life. And another big thing for us is walking in the new and then trying to walk backwards. A lot of times, once we've given up those things in our old life, we're like, well, I gave this up, but I think I made a mistake. I'm gonna actually go back because I was more comfortable with my old stuff than with this new stuff that I'm about to face. And we see that in the life of the children of Israel when they leave Egypt. They left Egypt, they were happy, oh, we're not slaves anymore. And then as they were walking through the wilderness, they're like, wait, but we're not eating as good as we used to. And we have to sleep with beasts outside. And this isn't really what we wanted. Like, we want to actually go back to our old ways, and what ended up becoming a 40-day journey became a 40-year journey. And for a lot of us, we're in seasons where we're either supposed to be single, or we're supposed to be actually spending our time with God, or we're supposed to be actually worried about our side hustles or our dreams, but we let other things pull us back, and then that journey that was supposed to take a week or a few months turns into years. You ask yourself, why am I still single? And it's been 4 or 5 years, and it's because you haven't learned the things that you were supposed to learn. You ask yourself, why isn't God talking to me? But you actually haven't sat down and actually took the time to actually spend time with God at all once. And even if you do it once, you don't do it consistently. It's like, well, I'm going to wake up, I'm going to say a little prayer, and then I'm going to go about my day. I'm going to go about my day. And for us to truly keep God first, it's really about the relationship with God. You actually have to spend time with God. You actually have to get to know God. You have to actually get to know him for yourself. And once you start to understand who he is for you, you'll also start to understand yourself a lot better. Because once you actually start to get to know God for yourself, he'll show you who you truly are, good and bad. Good and bad. He'll start to show you who you truly are, good and bad. And he'll start to reveal things to you that you either have to let go, things that you either have to address in your life, and then he's going to also show you the path that you need to be on. And it talks in the Bible somewhere, I can't remember exactly where, it talks about how the path of the world is wide, but the path of the righteous is very, very, very narrow. It's very, very narrow, and few try to get in, and some can't. And it also reminds me about how a lot of people are smart, but few are wise. And it takes wisdom. If we go back to Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 to 27, please. Anyone who listens to my teachings and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on a solid rock. Through the rain comes in torrents, and the floodwaters rise, and the winds beat against that house. It won't collapse because it is built on bedrock. But anyone who hears my teachings and doesn't obey, it is foolish, like a person who builds a house on sand. When the rains and the floods come and the winds that beat against the house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. And the biggest thing you have to ask yourselves is, do you want to be wise or do you want to be foolish? And if you decide to be wise, what are you actually building your foundation on? Are you building your foundation on God? Are you building your foundation on your friends? Are you building your foundation on how you want your life to be? What is your foundation of your life set upon? Because for a lot of us, certain things happen to us and then we get swayed away, and it's because our foundations are not strong at all. They're so weak, they're paper weak. You put a weight on a paper and it falls right through. And that's how our foundations are. They're not solid at all. You need to ask yourself, what is the foundation of your life, basically? Because when you actually see what your foundation of your life is, and if you see when that is not on God, then you actually have to make the decision to change that immediately. Because if you don't change it immediately, you'll always be in the seasons of where you feel like your life is always in a storm. The wind blows you this direction, and you go the other direction because there's nothing firm that you're holding on to. And when you come to the decision that you actually want to build your life on a foundation of Christ, that's when you start to notice that when things come your way, good or bad, yeah, you'll probably be down, but you understand that in the long term, you'll be all right. And that's a big thing for a lot of us that we have to realize. A lot of us, sometimes we're so short-minded and we can never see the long goal. And the long goal is so big. Because when you see the long goal and you decide to not be so worried about the short term, you won't make irrational decisions. You won't make irrational decisions. A lot of us, because of how situations look in our short term, we decide to make irrational decisions to try and be proactive and counteract those situations in our life. But in the long term, it only hurts us even the more. And when you come to the realization that I have to focus on the long term, then you'll actually focus on God and what He's actually trying to tell you, whether it's easy or whether it's hard. And for the most part, it's only hard because growth requires being uncomfortable. To grow, to truly grow, to actually be better, you have to be uncomfortable. There's no person who actually became great being comfortable. You have to be willing to sacrifice. You have to be willing to let certain things go. And for me, in a nutshell, that's basically everything that I have to share with you guys today in terms of it's the relationship for me. You have to be able to see the long-term view. Because if you don't see the long-term view and you are always so short-sighted, you'll always make mistakes because you're not thinking rationally. And that's pretty much it for me today. I hope you guys were able to grab something for the most part today, and that is it. Thank you so much.